I want to double click on what you were talking about, Yassine, with the whole yield side of Ether, the asset, right? This is a very core component of the relationship between Ether and Ethereum. Proof of stake allows the Ethereum protocol to issue Ether yield. And as we started talking with this whole crypto section, we talked about Bitcoin as a non-sovereign money. It's a money that transcends nations, that transcends borders. And Ether, as this new similar sort of technology that transcends borders, offers a new protocol issued yield in Ether terms, in Ether denominations, that has no counterparty risk, right? Like the Ether is always solvent. Ethereum is always solvent because it can always issue new Ether, which is kind of a paradigm shift in where we can find yield in the world. Now we can find yield in crypto terms, in crypto native assets, internet native assets that have no nation state dependencies. And so I want to turn this question to Cathie. The cost of capital in the traditional world is really dependent on, the bond market. How risky are you going to get based off of the yields you can get in dollars on the bond market? But now that we've unlocked this new internet native risk-free rate with Ether staking, how do you think that's going to impact global yields and global investment appetite as Ethereum gets more and more adopted, if it does get more and more adopted over time?
Well, I think part of the heightened regulatory talk here in the United States and elsewhere, but it's really taken off in the last few months here, is because what you are talking about, the yield, has attracted so much interest that the banks themselves are beginning to feel it. I have been shocked. I listened to especially JP Morgan's call. It's a good kind of staple to understand what's going on in the banking industry. And, in a V-shaped recovery, Jamie Dimon was telling us that their loan growth would be negative through the end of this year. I said, what? And I began to think, could it be? Could what's going on in the Ethereum world already be impacting banks? Prices are determined at the margin. And so this could be really hurting the banks. And I think I'm going to take a very close look during the next few earnings seasons to see if we can dimension it. It doesn't seem like it is big enough yet, but I'm beginning to wonder, the search for yield, which again, the extremes, the bond market in the traditional world, I believe is in a bubble, certainly on the corporate credit side, which is where the risk is. And I can't help but believe that others believe the same and are searching elsewhere for yield, especially the hedge funds, I would say. So that's the first thing that comes to mind when you ask your question. And I'm beginning, and now you're going to have to rephrase your question if you want me to go any further.
Well, I just want to follow up on that, because the podcast and the movement we have here is called Bankless, right? So we've seen this for a while, but we're actually not sure that the banks are actually worried about it right now.
Oh, I think
they are?
Oh, definitely. I think part of the regulatory heat that is taking place now is because the banks are beginning to see how much this is going to hollow them out.
Wow. There's a really key thing that Cathie said of prices being set at the margin, and I would layer in another thing that I learned from her of what really matters is the share of incremental growth. And so you have very large bases. And so you could look at the banks and be like, well, how could crypto, this kind of small thing be disrupting these very large based banks? But if crypto, when you look at these growth rates in the hundreds of %, if that is eating the incremental growth share, that starts to weigh on bank growth expectations, and all assets are priced based on expectations, right? And so that's where these seemingly small things that are hyper growth can have a significant impact on the growth expectations of much larger asset bases. And so, when we think about the yield market, you have the people who are lending and then also the people who are borrowing, right? And when I at least think of myself down, I feel old for crypto, right? I'm 31. Like
ancient.
I'm basically a crypto boomer now. I'll admit it. But like myself down, I see people like increasingly asking like, hey, like, can I use this to borrow against, right? Like if you think of something like MakerDAO, that I can take out a loan 365 days a year, 24/7. It's a flat rate. And while makers rates, and when I say flat rate, like everyone gets the same rate, there's no preferential treatment. There are other systems that give you fixed rate lending. And so that whole world is mushrooming, and that's some of the incremental share. I think a thing I want to piece apart a little bit more here is this idea of the risk-free rate, because I think it could be so fundamental. So when you think of the U.S. Treasuries providing a risk-free rate, this is something that you look at a lot, Cathie, as like the base of valuation for assets. Mm-hmm. And I want to call it a risk minimized rate, because I think that yes. We just presume, the U.S. is always going to remain solvent, but mm-hmm. there is still counterparty risk there. And so there's a risk minimized rate in the meat space on T-bills. And then Ether is going to provide the most risk minimized yield in the crypto space. And I want to call it risk minimized because people are going to say, there's way too much risk in crypto. You can call it risk free. So then we just agree, okay, it is risk minimized. And then you start to look at what are the components that go into risk minimization. And this is where we get into the importance of decentralization, right? Where not all proof of stake is created equal. And you've got, delegated versus the more pure proof of stake that Ethereum is working towards. I've got a plane flying nearby. But Cathie, I guess a question I would have for you is, can you envision a future where Ethereum's risk-free rate or risk minimized rate is starting to influence the broader internet economy and be that baseline for how people think about valuing other internet-based assets?
I absolutely can see that, especially since monetary policies around the world have pretty much become unhinged. And, talk about trust. I think there's more trust in this ecosystem, in the way you've defined it, risk minimized, than there might be in the traditional world, as if we're right, there's going to be a lot of creative destruction and counterparty risk. And these banks are going to be losing share to the crypto world. And I want to get back to that in a moment, because you seem so surprised. And I think it's so obvious, but now I realize what the disconnect is there. But yes, absolutely, I can. And if I could say something, I learned an important lesson it was the currency crisis, the Asian currency crisis in the 90s, 97, I think it was. And the Thai baht devalued, and nobody thought anything of it. Thailand was, hardly measurable out there, but it ricocheted. There was an Asian crisis that took place, domino effect. And so we began to ask companies like Boeing at the time, oh, what's your exposure to Asia? It seems as though something's unraveling there. And they'd say, nothing, not even 5%. Well, what they didn't say is it might have been 4% of their sales, but it was more than 100% of their growth. And so when Asia went down, Boeing's earnings imploded in a way that most people couldn't understand, because they said, wait a minute, they told us it was only 5%. Yes, but they didn't say what percent of the growth it was. And I think we're talking about something equivalent here. And so, oh yes, the banks are onto this.
I'll tell you why I was a little bit surprised. I think it's because like we're in the sort of the crypto trenches, and to Yassine's you quote earlier, right? We're somewhere in that stage of them ignoring us and them laughing at us. That's the stage we've lived in crypto. Yes. And so to hear somebody outside of that crypto bubble say, no, actually they're in the stage of maybe fear fight. And for you to talk about it as like a hollowing out of the banking system, and they see that on the margin, and it's starting to affect their growth rates is pretty amazing, actually, for me to hear.